What if the real problem was never love, but money? According to explosive claims circulating online, what finally pushed Remy, May, and Papoose into public tension wasn't betrayal. It was control. Control of finances. Control of decisions. Control of who really benefited when the cameras were off. Fans thought this was a private disagreement. Insiders say it was years of pressure finally boiling over. Receipts were hinted at. Numbers were whispered. And suddenly, silence turned into chaos. Was this about fairness, or power, support, or ownership? And why did everything explode only when money entered the conversation? Stay with us, because this isn't just relationship drama. It's a story about leverage, unspoken agreements, and what happens when financial trust breaks down in public. According to those familiar with the situation, the tension between Remy Ma and Papoose didn't start with an argument. It started with a question, a simple one. Who's really in charge of the money? At first, everything looked solid from the outside. A united front, mutual support, public praise, the kind of partnership fans admire. But behind closed doors, the dynamic was more complicated. According to insiders, finances weren't just shared, they were structured. Roles were defined. Decisions were filtered. Access wasn't equal. And when access isn't equal, resentment grows quietly. This wasn't about being broke. This was about control. Who signed what? Who approved what? Who had final say? Jaguar-style commentators claim the first cracks appeared when earnings increased. More money doesn't solve imbalance. It exposes it. With growth came questions. With questions came tension. According to sources, Papoose was positioned as stability, management, logistics, protection. Meanwhile, Remy Ma was positioned as the brand, the face, the momentum. That imbalance worked, until it didn't. Because branding creates power, and power demands negotiation. Insiders say financial decisions started feeling less collaborative and more directional. One voice carried more weight. One perspective mattered more. Not intentionally, structurally. Money has a way of formalizing dynamics that emotions try to soften. According to those close to the situation, conversations about spending, investments, and future planning began to feel charged. Not loud, restrained. And restrained tension is the most dangerous kind. It doesn't explode immediately, it simmers. Fans noticed subtle shifts, different tones in interviews, less shared enthusiasm, carefully chosen words, nothing obvious. But energy doesn't lie. According to commentators, the real issue wasn't money itself. It was financial autonomy. Who could move independently? Who needed approval? Who absorbed risk? When those questions aren't answered clearly, silence fills the gaps, and silence always favors power. Eventually, online whispers began. Not accusations, patterns. Fans speculated about control, dependence, and leverage. Still, nothing went public. Until it did. According to online sources, once money disputes entered digital spaces, the tone shifted instantly. What was once private became narrative. Screenshots were hinted at, stories conflicted, and suddenly, both sides were being interpreted rather than heard. That's when chaos started. Not because details were revealed, but because trust cracked. Financial trust is different from emotional trust. Emotional trust can survive misunderstanding. Financial trust rarely does. Once numbers are questioned, everything gets reevaluated. Support starts looking like strategy. Protection starts looking like restriction. Partnership starts looking like negotiation. According to insiders, neither side expected the reaction to be this loud. Money stories travel faster because they imply motive. And motive invites judgment. This wasn't a breakup story, it was a power story. And once power is questioned publicly, there's no easy way back to silence. This was the moment everything shifted. Not because of betrayal, but because money forced conversations that should have happened earlier, privately. And now, those conversations were happening in public fragments. uncontrolled, incomplete, and explosive. According to people watching the situation closely, the drama between Remy Ma and Papoose didn't explode because someone wanted attention. It exploded because containment failed. For a long time, the money issue stayed behind closed doors. Conversations happened quietly. Decisions were delayed. Tension was managed instead of addressed. That worked, until it didn't. According to insiders, the trigger wasn't a single argument. It was a misalignment of expectations that finally surfaced at the wrong time, in the wrong space. Money conversations are supposed to stay private, but when private systems break down, the first leaks aren't numbers, they're tone. And people noticed the tone change immediately. Suddenly, statements sounded guarded. Support felt conditional. Praise felt strategic instead of organic. Fans may not know details, but they recognize energy shifts. According to online observers, the first spark came from a seemingly harmless comment, a reference to fairness, a mention of contributions, language that implied calculation instead of unity. That language opened the door. Once the door opened, speculation rushed in. Screenshots were rumored. DMs were hinted at. Old interviews were rewatched with new suspicion. This is how money drama spreads online. Not through facts, but through reinterpretation. According to commentators, the core question wasn't who took what, it was who decided. Decision-making power is the real currency. Insiders claim that once the public sensed a power imbalance, narratives hardened quickly. Supporters chose sides. Critics reframed past moments. Neutrality vanished. Money disputes don't allow middle ground. They imply winners and losers, even when reality is more complex. According to those close to the situation, both sides underestimated how quickly the internet would escalate things. What felt like internal tension suddenly became public theater, and public theater demands villains. That pressure forced reactions, even when reactions weren't planned. One side tried to stay quiet. The other tried to clarify without revealing too much. Neither strategy worked. Silence looked suspicious. Clarification looked defensive. That's the trap of public money disputes. Every move appears strategic, whether it is or not. According to insiders, the most damaging moment wasn't a post or a comment. It was timing. The issue surfaced during a period of heightened visibility when attention was already focused. Visibility amplifies everything. What might have been ignored at another time became explosive. Once the narrative took hold, people began reinterpreting the past. Old support looked transactional. Old compromises looked coerced. Old teamwork looked uneven. Money reframes memory. According to analysts, this is why financial disputes are so corrosive. They rewrite history in real time. And once history is rewritten publicly, trust erodes fast. Insiders say attempts were made to calm things down, private conversations, requests to slow the narrative, efforts to redirect attention back to work. But the internet doesn't slow down, it accelerates. The moment chaos started trending, control was lost. Fans weren't waiting for confirmation. They were constructing conclusions. According to commentators, the real damage wasn't reputational, it was relational. Once money disagreements become public, reconciliation becomes harder. Every step forward is judged through suspicion. Even peace looks staged. According to those close to Remy Ma, the pressure felt overwhelming. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending a version of reality that no longer belonged to her. And according to those close to Papoose, the frustration came from feeling misunderstood, from watching private complexity flattened into public accusation. Both sides felt boxed in. That's what happens when private systems collapse publicly. Nobody wins. The chaos online wasn't driven by truth or lies. It was driven by uncertainty. And uncertainty invites projection. People project motives. They project intent. They project blame. According to insiders, once money entered the public narrative, the original issue was lost. What mattered wasn't resolution, it was reaction. That's when chaos truly began. Not because money was discussed, but because trust was discussed without context. And trust without context is combustible. This was the point of no return, the moment when silence stopped being an option and explanation became dangerous. Because anything said now would be filtered through suspicion, and anything unsaid would be treated as confirmation. That's the paradox of public disputes. You're judged whether you speak or not. This is where the drama shifted from disagreement to damage control. And according to insiders, what came next wasn't honesty. It was survival mode. According to those watching closely, once the money dispute between Remy and Papoose went public, the priority shifted instantly. It was no longer about solving the problem. It was about containing the fallout. When private conflict becomes public spectacle, resolution stops being the goal. Survival becomes the focus. Every move is calculated not for truth, but for impact. According to insiders, both sides recognized the same reality at the same time. The narrative had escaped them. And once that happens, control becomes reactive. The first instinct was restraint. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't strategic. It was defensive. Each side understood that speaking too much could deepen the damage, but saying nothing could look like guilt. It's a lose-lose position. According to commentators, this is where damage control becomes delicate, where statements need to sound calm without being cold, clarifying without accusing, human without oversharing. That balance is almost impossible once money enters the narrative. Money changes how words land. Even neutral statements get interrogated for motive. Every phrase is parsed. Every omission is highlighted. According to those close to Remy, there was frustration with how quickly the story shifted away from nuance. What she experienced as years of complicated partnership was being reduced to dollar signs and power plays. She wasn't just defending herself, she was defending context. But context doesn't trend. Sound bites do. According to those close to Papoose, there was a different frustration, feeling misrepresented, feeling flattened, watching public assumptions override private realities. He wasn't trying to dominate the story, he was trying to survive it. Both sides felt unheard. And that's the most dangerous place to be during public fallout. According to analysts, this is where many disputes spiral. Each side believes the other is benefiting from silence. Each side believes speaking will only help the other. So they stall. They wait. They hope the story burns itself out. Sometimes it does. But this one didn't, because money narratives stick. Fans and commentators began demanding accountability. Not specifics, symbols, apologies, ownership, admissions. Public pressure doesn't want nuance. It wants resolution theater. According to insiders, neither side was willing to give that. Not because they were hiding, but because the truth didn't fit a clean ending. There was no single villain, no single mistake, no single moment to point to. Just accumulation. Accumulation doesn't satisfy online audiences. So frustration grew. Damage control efforts became more visible. Tone policing, careful appearances, strategic silence, emphasis on work and professionalism, all the usual tools. But according to Jaguar-style observers, those tools only work when trust still exists. Once trust cracks, strategy feels artificial. Audiences sense when words are chosen to manage rather than to communicate. That sensing fuels more skepticism. According to insiders, both sides face the same internal debate. Say something real and risk misinterpretation, or say nothing and let assumptions harden. Neither option felt safe. This is where money disputes become emotionally exhausting. They force people to defend themselves against stories they didn't write. According to those close to the situation, conversations happened behind the scenes about mediation, about mutual understanding, about finding a way to cool things down. But mediation doesn't erase public memory. Once a narrative forms, it doesn't dissolve easily. Even peace gets questioned. According to analysts, this is why so many public disputes end without clear resolution. Not because resolution isn't possible, but because resolution doesn't satisfy the audience's need for drama. Drama feeds engagement. Resolution ends it, and engagement was already out of control. According to insiders, both Remy Ma and Papoose realized something difficult at the same time. No matter what they did next, the story would continue without them. That realization changes behavior. Once you understand you're no longer driving the narrative, you stop trying to steer it. You focus on protecting yourself. That's what damage control really is. Not fixing perception, limiting harm. According to commentators, this phase is where reputations quietly get reshaped. Not destroyed, adjusted. People remember fragments. They fill in gaps. Over time, those fragments become the story. And the original issue, the actual money conversation, fades into abstraction. All that remains is tension. That's the cost of public fallout. You lose the ability to be specific. You become symbolic. According to those watching, this is where the drama stopped being about money and started being about trust. Trust between partners, trust with audiences, trust in narratives. And once trust is damaged publicly, rebuilding it takes time and silence, which is exactly where this story went next. Not into resolution, but into distance. According to people close to the situation, once the chaos reached its peak, something very specific happened between Remy Ma and Papoose. They stopped trying to explain. Not because they had nothing to say, but because explanation no longer worked. Dialogue assumes listening. Listening assumes trust. And trust was already fractured. According to insiders, this was the phase where distance became the safest option. Not dramatic separation, not public declarations, just space. Physical, emotional, and strategic. Distance cools things that words can't. When dialogue fails publicly, distance becomes damage control. Observers noticed the shift almost immediately. Fewer shared appearances, less crossover in messaging, separate lanes, carefully maintained. Nothing announced, nothing denied. Lend silence, but this time with boundaries. According to analysts, this is a common pivot in high-profile disputes. Once conversation becomes ammunition, people stop offering words that can be weaponized. Distance reduces material. No statements means no quotes. No quotes means no headlines. Distance doesn't resolve conflict. It contains it. According to those familiar with the situation, both sides reached the same conclusion independently. Anything said now would only serve the narrative, not the truth. So they stepped back. Stepping back isn't weakness, it's triage. You stop the bleeding before you worry about healing. Distance also changes perception. When people stop appearing together, the public fills in the blanks. But those blanks are quieter than active conflict. Distance feels definitive. Dialogue feels ongoing. According to commentators, this is why distance often gets mistaken for resolution. The noise stops. The tension fades from feeds. People assume things settled, but settlement and silence aren't the same. According to insiders, the emotional cost of distance was significant. Distance prevents escalation, but it also prevents understanding. It freezes dynamics instead of resolving them. But freezing felt preferable to combustion, especially when money and power were already part of the story. Money disputes don't cool easily through conversation once they go public. Every explanation sounds like justification. Every clarification sounds like defense. Distance avoids that trap. According to those close to Remy Ma, the focus shifted inward. Work, stability, regaining footing, avoiding spaces where the narrative could be reignited. She's distance allowed her to regain control over what she was associated with. According to those close to Papoose, the same thing happened. Pulling back wasn't avoidance, it was preservation, of dignity, of autonomy, of future options. Distance protects future flexibility. Dialogue locks you into the present conflict. According to analysts, this phase is where many public stories quietly end. Not with closure, but with separation of narratives. Each side continues forward independently. The shared story dissolves into parallel ones. Fans notice, but they stop asking. The internet moves on, but distance leaves residue. Unanswered questions don't disappear. They settle. And settled questions shape perception. According to observers, this is when the story shifted from active drama to lingering speculation. No new information, just memory. Reinterpretation. Old moments replayed, old interviews rewatched, old assumptions reinforced. Distance doesn't erase narratives, it fossilizes them. According to insiders, this was the hardest part to accept. Once distance replaces dialogue, the opportunity to correct misunderstandings narrows. But correcting misunderstandings publicly carries risk. So the distance remains. This is where both sides understood something crucial. The story would never be fully told. Not because the truth didn't exist, but because the cost of telling it outweighed the benefit. According to commentators, this is the invisible end of many public conflicts. Not a resolution, an expiration. The drama runs out of oxygen. People stop caring loudly. They care quietly, or not at all. Distance ensures that. Jaguar-style observers note that distance is often framed as maturity, and sometimes it is. But it's also a concession that the public space is no longer safe for honest conversation, so conversation retreats, and what's left is silence shaped by space. This wasn't reconciliation, this wasn't victory, this wasn't closure. It was containment through distance. And according to insiders, once distance sets in, the final phase begins. Not immediately, but inevitably. The phase where people start asking what all of this meant. Not for them, but for everyone watching. According to people who've watched situations like this unfold before, the most expensive part of public drama doesn't happen during the explosion. It happens after, when the posts slow down, when the comments disappear, when the story stops trending. That's when the cost becomes personal. For Remy, and Papoose, distance may have contained the chaos, but it didn't erase the impact. It simply moved it out of sight. According to insiders, this phase is the hardest because there's no adrenaline left, no urgency, no clear enemy to push against, just aftermath. Distance creates calm, but calm creates reflection. And reflection forces people to sit with questions that never got answered. Questions like, what was fair? What wasn't? Who gave more than they got? And why were those conversations delayed until it was too late? Money disputes, especially public ones, leave a residue. Even when no numbers are confirmed, the implication alone changes how people see everything that came before. Support looks strategic, sacrifice looks transactional, loyalty looks conditional. According to observers, this is where trust takes its deepest hit, not because of betrayal, but because of reinterpretation. Once money is introduced as a lens, the past gets rewritten, and rewritten pasts are hard to live with. According to those close to Remy, there was a period of withdrawal, not from work, from engagement, choosing fewer public conversations, less openness, more control, not out of bitterness, out of caution. When trust fractures publicly, vulnerability becomes a risk instead of a strength. According to those close to Papoose, a similar recalibration happened. Fewer explanations, less need to be understood, more emphasis on self-definition instead of public validation. Public misunderstanding teaches people to stop explaining. And that shift is costly, because explanation is how connection is maintained. Without it, relationships with audiences become distant, professional, polite, safe, but shallow. According to analysts, this is the long-term effect of unresolved public disputes, not cancellation, not collapse, but disengagement. Fans stop asking, media stops pressing, everyone moves on. But something is lost in that movement. The emotional investment that once existed doesn't return easily. People remember tension even when they don't remember details. Memory holds feeling longer than fact. Jaguar-style commentators point out that this is how reputations subtly change. Not ruined, reframed. People don't think badly, they just think differently. And thinking differently affects support. Distance also affects future collaboration. Once money disputes become part of someone's narrative, others grow cautious. Not accusatory, cautious. Caution slows opportunity, not dramatically, incrementally. According to insiders, this is why silence after chaos is both protective and limiting. It shields from further damage, but also narrows emotional range. People stop inviting complexity. They stick to what's safe. But safety isn't where creativity thrives. According to observers, both sides understood this cost, but accepted it anyway, because the alternative was ongoing conflict. And ongoing conflict is unsustainable. Distance offered peace, but peace came with boundaries. Those boundaries didn't just exist between Remy and Papoose, they existed between them and the public. According to analysts, this is the price many public figures pay after financial disputes. Not exposure, detachment. They become harder to read, harder to access, harder to feel close to. And while that protects them, it also changes the relationship forever. Shedding light on this phase, commentators say it's where many stories quietly end. No closure, no confession, just time passing. And time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it just makes things quieter. Jaguar-style observers argue that the real lesson isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about how easily unresolved money conversations can reshape lives once they leave private space. Money doesn't just affect bank accounts. It affects meaning. Meaning of support, meaning of partnership, meaning of trust. And once meaning changes, behavior follows. By the time the public stopped paying attention, both sides had already adjusted. Not emotionally, structurally, new routines, new boundaries, new definitions of independence. That's the real aftermath, not drama. It's distance that becomes permanent. And according to those watching closely, that permanence set the stage for the final phase of this story. Not about them, but about what stories like this teach everyone else. According to longtime observers, the biggest mistake people make when watching situations like this is assuming they end when the noise ends. They don't. They evolve. What happened between Remy and Papoose wasn't just a personal disagreement that went public. It became a reference point, a cautionary example, a quiet lesson absorbed by everyone watching from the sidelines. Because money disputes don't just affect the people involved, they retrain the culture. According to analysts, once money enters a relationship narrative publicly, it permanently alters how audiences interpret partnership. Love stops being the dominant lens. Support gets reevaluated. Loyalty gets audited. Everything becomes conditional. And once that happens, there's no going back to innocence. People start asking different questions, not just about this story, but about all stories. Who benefits? Who controls access? Who decides? Who sacrifices? Those questions linger long after the drama fades. Observers say this is why money disputes feel more destabilizing than cheating scandals or public arguments. Cheating feels emotional, money feels structural. Structure implies systems. Systems imply power. And power stories don't end cleanly. According to cultural commentators, this moment reinforced something many people already suspected, but rarely saw confirmed publicly: that financial dynamics shape relationships more than public narratives admit. People can forgive emotion. They struggle to forgive imbalance. Once imbalance becomes visible, trust erodes not just between individuals, but between audiences and the idea of partnership itself. That's the cultural cost. After stories like this, people become more skeptical. They watch couples differently. They interpret gestures through calculation. They assume strategy where there may be sincerity, and that skepticism spreads. According to observers, this is how culture hardens, not through outrage, but through pattern recognition. People stop believing the surface story. They start looking for leverage. That shift affects everyone, not just public figures. Money disputes going public normalize suspicion. They teach audiences to question motives by default, to see collaboration as transaction. That's not inherently wrong, but it's heavy. According to analysts, this is why such stories linger even when details remain unclear. They tap into a deeper anxiety, The fear that intimacy is always conditional when money is involved. The fear that partnership is really negotiation. And once that fear is activated, it reshapes expectations. People become more guarded, more contractual, less generous, not just with money, with trust. Jaguar-style observers argue that this is the real reason silence often follows public money disputes, not because people are hiding, but because speaking further would only reinforce the transactional frame. Once that frame exists, every word sounds like accounting, so silence feels safer. But silence doesn't undo the lesson. The lesson is already learned. According to those watching closely, Remy Ma and Papoose didn't just step back from the spotlight. They stepped into a different narrative space, one where everything they do will be filtered through financial memory. That's not punishment, it's consequence, and it's not unique. It's what happens every time money disputes escape private space. The public doesn't forget. It just stops asking out loud. Observers say this moment will quietly influence future partnerships, how they're structured, how they're discussed, how much is shared, more contracts, more boundaries, less transparency. Because transparency feels dangerous once money becomes public weaponry. This is why the story matters beyond the names involved. It shows how easily trust becomes collateral damage, not destroyed, devalued. And devalued trust doesn't get rebuilt quickly. It gets replaced with safeguards. According to analysts, culture is moving toward more guarded relationships, professionally and personally, not because people are colder, but because stories like this teach them caution. Caution becomes wisdom, but too much caution becomes distance, and distance becomes the norm. That's the long shadow of public money disputes. They don't end relationships, they redefine them. Jaguar-style commentary ends on a sobering note. Money doesn't corrupt love. But when money becomes the loudest part of the story, love stops being enough to explain anything. And when explanations disappear, people fill the gaps with suspicion. That's what lingers. Not the drama, not the chaos, but the quiet shift in how people interpret connection itself. This story didn't explode because of money. It exploded because money exposed imbalance. And imbalance, that once seen can't be unseen. That's why this was never just drama. It was a mirror. And once a mirror cracks, you don't look at reflections the same way again. Like, subscribe, and share.